College football. It's a sport with energy, tradition, and conspiracy. Since you're watching what is now part 5 of this series, I can take a gamble and say you already know this. This has been one of my most massive projects that I've done in my time on YouTube, so thank you to all of you great people for watching it. If you haven't already, I would totally recommend going back and watching all of the earlier parts if you're interested in hearing about well-known college football information, or in the case of parts 3 and 4, controversial entries. If you feel like supporting the channel, feel free to drop a like or subscribe to the channel. There's also a Patreon if you want to go join that. Would recommend, by the way. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into part 5 of the college football iceberg. This is where things start to get really interesting. This contains a lot of concealed information regarding these entries, and also includes many more entries teetering on conspiracy, or just going over it. So without further ado, let's waste no more time and jump right into it. Kirby Smart's quarterback management. Kirby Smart is the current head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs with one of the most dominant teams in college football. His 94-16 record at Georgia didn't come without its fair share of blood, sweat, and tears. Or in the case of Kirby Smart, bad quarterback management, according to many Georgia fans. In Kirby Smart's first year as head coach of Georgia, 2016, he switched between many quarterbacks through the season. Kirby Smart implemented a quarterback system which included the use of 2 quarterbacks on drives. These 2 quarterbacks at the time were Grayson Lambert and Jacob Eason, who both received lots of playing time against North Carolina in their opener, a game Georgia won 33-24. Eason went on to start the next game against Nicholas State. He played the whole game up until the 4th quarter, where Lambert was brought in to replace him on the final drive. Lambert's drive bled out the clock to get Georgia to hold on for the victory, 26-24. For the rest of the season, however, Eason went on to become the starter. In the 2017 season, it was believed that Eason would be the starter, but in his first game against Appalachian State, he suffered a knee injury which caused backup quarterback Jake Fromm to enter the scene. Fromm remained the starter even after Eason's recovery, which led Eason to hit the transfer portal to join Washington to the disdain of many Georgia fans. In the 2018 and 2019 season, Fromm would remain the starter for Georgia despite intense media push for Smart to sub out Fromm for very highly rated prospect Justin Fields in 2018. This never happened, as Fields never won the starting job over Fromm or saw meaningful playing time in Athens. Arguably one of his most memorable moments with Georgia was a botched fake punt late in the 4th quarter against Alabama in the SEC Championship, putting a bow on what was a very unfortunate year for Fields. Fields entered the transfer portal in December of 2018 and eventually landed in Columbus, Ohio, where he carried the Ohio State Buckeyes to the playoffs in 2019. Fromm, meanwhile, underperformed, finishing with his lowest completion percentage of 60.2. with 24 touchdowns and 5 interceptions before declaring for the 2020 NFL Draft. The story in 2020 was even more interesting, as it was originally set for Georgia to choose between Wake Forest transfer Jamie Newman to become the next starter for Georgia, or former Southern California quarterback JT Daniels, who is recovering from an ACL injury. The COVID-19 pandemic threw a wrench in Georgia's grand plan, however, with Newman's sudden decision to opt out for the season in early September. Georgia, instead of going with Daniels for the first game against Arkansas, chose up-and-coming quarterback DeJuan Mathis. Mathis' poor performance against Arkansas set up another change, this time being walk-on Stetson Bennett. From there, Bennett would be Georgia's starter, but his performance decreased following losses to Alabama and Florida. Meanwhile, Fields led Ohio State to the national championship. As it turns out, starting Stetson Bennett, while initially being seen as one of the worst moves of the Kirby Smart era, turned out to be one of the best, as Bennett won Georgia 2 national championships and set up Georgia as one of the Goliaths of the college football world for the foreseeable future. The Galloping Ghost. This is in reference to a player known as Red Grange, or Harold Edward Grange. He was a football player who played for the Illinois Fighting Illini from 1923 through 1925. Grange was a 3-time consensus All-American and led his team to the national championship in 1923. He was the only unanimous All-American selection in 1924, making him the first player in college football history to receive that honor. One of his most memorable moments came from the matchup against Michigan on October 18, 1924. The Michigan Wolverines entered the game as favorites, having won a national title the previous year. Grange returned the opening kickoff for a 95-yard touchdown. He later scored 5 more touchdowns, with 3 of these being in the first 12 minutes of the game, and on top of that, he played defense, intercepting 2 passes. The game inspired sports writer Grantland Rice to write this description: "A streak of fire, a breath of flame, eluding all who reach and clutch, a gray ghost thrown into the game that rival hands may never touch, a rubber bonding blasting soul whose destination is the goal, Red Grange of Illinois." Following the game, another sports writer, Warren Brown, gave Grange the nickname the Galloping Ghost. The jersey number, 77, is currently retired at both Illinois as well as Grange's pro team, the Chicago Bears. Northwestern pattern. When you look at overall records, Northwestern is one of the most sporadic when it comes to records per year. During the Pat Fitzgerald era from 2006 through 2022, Northwestern had a fair share of ups and downs. One of the more familiar things about Northwestern was a pattern that fans seemed to catch on to. Starting in 2015, in odd-numbered years, Northwestern would exceed expectations, and in even-numbered years, they would heavily regress and disappoint. In 2015, they finished with a record of 10-3 before finishing 7-6 in 2016, and then 10-3 again in 2017 before a 9-5 finish in 2018. 2019 seemed to have broken this trend, as Northwestern finished 3-9 before an unexpected 7-2 finish in 2020. This trend was broken further following a 3-9 finish in 2021 and an even worse 1-11 finish in 2022. Following an alleged hazing incident in the summer of 2023, Pat Fitzgerald was fired, and with little time to find a coaching search, David Brown, the defensive coordinator, was promoted to head coach. But now it seems the curse is once again lit, as Northwestern blew expectations out of the water with an 8-5 finish and the Las Vegas Bowl win. Is the curse a real thing, or is it just a coincidence? Only time will tell. Dead bodies under Neyland Stadium. At the University of Tennessee, there is an Anthropology department, which is located inside Neyland Stadium in rooms that used to serve as the players' dormitory. There are more than 1,000 skeletons curated inside Neyland Stadium. Bodies are donated to the department, which then studies how they decompose at an off-site facility known as the Body Farm. The skeletons are then cleaned inside Neyland, which are then used to develop tests that help law enforcement identify the remains of unknown individuals. As for the dead bodies being under the stadium as ghosts, this is nothing more than a major exaggeration portrayed in a movie we discussed earlier. In 2009's The Blind Side, actress Kathy Bates played a tutor who tells football star Michael Orr not to go to UT. Law enforcement, she says, have body parts under Neyland. Regardless, in 2017, all of the bones were removed from Neyland and moved to the new Strong Hall. In fact, several times a year they are called on to remove a box of bones so families can come visit the remains of their loved ones who generously donated their bodies to science. Even if this didn't happen, this entire entry is a major overstatement. Referee tackle. During all college football games, referees are out on the field to inspect the game from a close viewpoint. However, on the rarest of occasions, they get in the way of a big play, disrupting a player, or in the case of South Carolina quarterback Stephen Garcia, lays them out. In a matchup against LSU in 2008, Garcia was lined up in shotgun with no more than 5 yards to go against LSU's defense. Seeing the real estate in front of him on a pass play, Garcia took off. He had no idea that the referee was in front of him. The ref in question, Wilbert Hackett Jr., proceeded to lower his shoulder, putting Garcia on the ground. When recounting the events on the day in an interview with SB Nation, Garcia said that he literally tackled me. Hackett just so happened to be an alumni of the Kentucky Wildcats, who Garcia had beaten the week before, so Garcia had his suspicions that there was a foul motive at play. In defense of Hackett, head coach of the Gamecocks, Steve Spurrier, said he was trying to get out of the way. Steven sort of cut back right into him. Sometimes that will happen. The SEC administration also defended the referee, believing he was in the appropriate place at the appropriate time. Rudy was offsides. Rudy is a 1993 biographical sports film directed by David Anspaugh. It is an account of the life of Daniel Rudiger, who harbored dreams of playing football at the University of Notre Dame despite significant obstacles. This entry does require that I spoil the movie, so spoiler alert if anybody hasn't seen this 30-year-old movie, but the climax features walk-on Rudy finally hitting the field and sacking the quarterback to end a big game. The running conspiracy in the movie is that Rudy was offsides on this play. Other than being a major running gag at the expense of Notre Dame, this conspiracy doesn't hold any real value. Videl Alexander. Videl Alexander is a player who played as an offensive guard for the LSU Tigers between 2012 through 2015. The Buford, Georgia native was first-team All-SEC in 2015 and second-team All-American. This, as of recently, is not his full legacy. It was reported in June 2019 that Alexander's father, James, received approximately $180,000 from John Paul Feud, an LSU booster convicted in federal court of wire fraud and money laundering after embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his employer known as Our Lady of the Lake Hospitals. In June of 2023, LSU was forced to vacate 37 wins from 2012 through 2015 by the NCAA after they learned that Alexander had received financial benefits that violated NCAA rules during his time at LSU. What makes these wins in particular so devastating to lose for former LSU head coach Les Miles is that with these wins, he would have a winning percentage applicable to be eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. On June 17, 2024, Les Miles announced that he would be suing LSU for vacating wins in response to an NCAA infractions case. As of currently, this is all that is known about the lawsuit, but more details could arrive in the future. 2020, the game Dodge. As mentioned earlier, the 2020 season had a fair amount of cancellations, which caused records to be rather odd, such as the case of Ohio State, who finished the regular season with a record of 5-0. Following a win on December 5th against Michigan State, Ohio State was scheduled to face Michigan on December 12th. However, this matchup never happened as the game was canceled later in the week. Michigan was in a very different spot than Ohio State, suffering from a very disappointing 2-4 season. After a loss to Penn State at home on November 28th, they did not play another game that season. Many college football fans have gone back and forth debating on who canceled the game and why. As explained by Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel, the game was canceled due to increasing levels of positive COVID-19 tests on the Michigan football team. Some fans said that Michigan did this intentionally to dodge Ohio State and avoid a potential blowout loss. Opposing fans said that Ohio State was the one who dodged Michigan for two reasons. One, in order to avoid a potential loss since they had players out due to COVID-19 themselves, and number two, to avoid playing in a conference championship game. Ohio State sat in the top 4 of the college football playoff poll during this time, and it was expected that they would enter the college football playoffs as long as they did not lose a game. If Ohio State were to play 5 games or less, they would not be eligible to play in the Big Ten championship game according to Big Ten scheduling rules. Due to rule changes made by the Big Ten, however, this didn't matter, as Ohio State was still chosen to play in the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern, which they won 22-10. Fans still speculate to this day about who actually canceled the game, which in reality was Michigan, but nonetheless, people keep asking why. 1997 Heisman snub. The 1997 Heisman Trophy was considered to be one of the most controversial choices for a Heisman winner in college football history. It was the expectation for many that Tennessee quarterback Peyton Manning would win the Heisman Trophy, as his passing stats were very impressive. He also led the Heisman Trophy race for a majority of the season. However, to the shock of the college football world, the award was instead given to Michigan defensive back Charles Woodson, who to this day is the only primarily defensive player to win the Heisman Trophy. Manning had an impressive record and was projected to be the first overall pick in the 1998 NFL Draft, but 22% of voters left him off their ballots entirely. The final voting results were 1,815 for Woodson and 1,543 for Manning. Imagine the shock on your face when I tell you that Tennessee fans were mad about this. Some Tennessee fans and former coaches, including Philip Fulmer, believe that ABC and ESPN's coverage of the race unfairly favored Woodson and called the result the Heisman. Even former Florida coach Steve Spurrier, who reveled in going 3-0 against the Volunteers with Manning as their starter, suggested that Manning might have been held to a different standard. Many say this was the result of Michigan being undefeated versus Tennessee's one loss to Florida. Some even say this was the result of a hidden agenda against the Volunteers. Regardless, it is one of the most controversial Heisman races in history. Following the 2023 Heisman Trophy presentation on December 9th, ESPN released a 30 for 30 documentary about the race called The Great Heisman Race of 1997, showing the reactions of fans and sportscasters in real time. Dead steer on campus. Before the 2023 Big 12 championship game between the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma State Cowboys, a most peculiar event occurred. A dead Longhorn cow was found on the lawn of an Oklahoma State University fraternity the day before the game. The carcass was discovered at 6:30 a.m. in front of the farmhouse fraternity with its stomach cut open. The words FH were also written on the Longhorn side. 4 people were charged with connection to the crime. Bennett Fady, 20, Luke Ackerley, 19, Andrew King, 19, and Brody Shelby, 19. They were all charged with unlawful disposal of a carcass, which is a criminal misdemeanor. The men were all members of the Alpha Gamma Rho fraternity at Oklahoma State. Both sides were equally disgusted at the crime, showing support for law enforcement for finding the individuals behind the crime. As for the game itself, Texas won the Big 12 championship 49-21. Missouri's academic scandal. The Missouri Tigers were hit with a 1-year postseason ban and 3 years of probation for the football, baseball, and softball programs beginning in the 2019 season following an NCAA investigation. The investigation uncovered violations of, quote, ethical conduct, academic misconduct, and academic extra benefit rules in competing coursework for a dozen student athletes. These violations originate from a former athletics tutor who helped student athletes cheat their way through classes. The tutor in question, Yolanda Kumar, told the Kansas City Star that in 2016, she helped over a dozen student athletes commit academic fraud, ranging from completing homework to handling an entire course load to ensure passing grades were achieved. There is no indication Kumar was instructed to do so from coaches or administrators, and Mizzou self-reported the violations once the story went public. Missouri turned themselves in, which resulted in lesser penalties from the NCAA, but many say these penalties were still way too harsh. Anti-FSU agenda. This is one of the more recent conspiracies in college football in reference to the 2023 Florida State Seminoles. The team was led by coach Mike Norvell and Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback Jordan Travis. Florida State would go through the regular season undefeated, finishing 12-0. Although it came at a very heavy price as Travis came down with a season-ending ankle injury against North Alabama. Despite this, Florida State would go on to win the ACC championship against Louisville 16-6. An ugly win, but a win nonetheless. The 2023 college football playoff race was one of the most competitive, with Florida State competing with 13-0 Michigan, 12-1 Texas, 12-1 Alabama, and 13-0 Washington. All of these teams were also winners of their respective conference. On playoff selection day, number 1 Georgia, who went down to Alabama, was put all the way down at number 6. It was now between all of the conference champions. Texas beat Alabama in the regular season, so even though they had a loss, they still had the tiebreaker over Alabama. As the rankings were revealed, Michigan, Washington, and Texas were in the playoffs. It was then between Florida State and Alabama for the number 4 spot. To the shock of the college football world, the playoff committee chose Alabama over Florida State, citing the Travis injury as a major reason as to why they made this decision. It was the first time an undefeated Power 5 champion was left out of the college football playoffs. This choice was met with major outrage, both from the media and fans as well as the Florida State football team. This had a major effect on the Seminoles both off and on the field. 24 players opted out of the Orange Bowl against Georgia, including star players Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, and Jared Verse. This resulted in a 63-3 loss to Georgia, the biggest blowout in bowl history. Several sports writers following the loss spoke about the damage this choice made to the college football world, alleging bias being the reason as to why Florida State was left out. The continuing outrage sparked ESPN's Kirk Herbstreit to comment on the decision, saying, quote, "Because Alabama is better, period. Tell the conference commissioners to change the protocol to most deserving. Until then, I and everyone else is certainly allowed to give an opinion on a subjective discussion. Don't like it, change it." To this day, Florida State fans continue to protest this decision. Chili Bowl. The Cincinnati Chili Bowl was a proposed 2023 college football bowl game to be played in Cincinnati, Ohio at TQL Stadium and televised on the CW network. The NCAA declined to approve the bowl game amid a desire to keep bowl eligibility only for 6-6 teams. There are a few other proposed bowl games, including the Chocolate Bowl, the Little Rock Bowl, and the Medal of Honor Bowl. Technically, there's nothing stopping you from trying to push a bowl game called, the Squidtard Bowl, but these are the only bowl game brands that are being officially proposed by organizers and boosters, which are either active or on hold. The Slab of Bacon. This is in reference to the yearly rivalry game between the Wisconsin Badgers and the Minnesota Golden Gophers. The rivalry was first played in 1890 and has been played every single year since, with the lone exception being 1906. The rivalry's first trophy was the Slab of Bacon created by Dr. R.B. Fouch of Minneapolis. It is a piece of blank walnut wood with a football at the center bearing the letter that becomes M or W depending on which way the trophy is hung. The word bacon is carved at both ends, implying that the winner has brought home the bacon. The trophy went missing in 1943 after Minnesota won the game 25-13, and Wisconsin's women's student president, Peg Watrous, was unable to exchange it with the Minnesota student as planned. The trophy went missing for nearly 50 years, but the trophy was eventually found in a storage locker at Wisconsin's Camp Randall Stadium in 1994, where it had been well cared for and the scores from 1930 through 1970 had been painted on the back. The trophy was replaced in 1948 by the Paul Bunyan Axe, which is still used to commemorate the Wisconsin-Minnesota rivalry to this day. The trophy is now kept in a football office at Wisconsin. In case you were curious, this rivalry is one of the most competitive all time, with Wisconsin leading the series 63, 62, and 8. Alabama's fake national championships. Alabama football has a total of 18 claimed national titles from 1925 through 2020, as well as 5 unclaimed national titles during this period. Some say that Alabama's claimed national championships are not legitimate, including the 1934 title, which Alabama claims to share with 2 other teams. The title givers for 1934 were Dunkel, a fan who created his own polling system, and Williamson, a geologist who also created his own system. Others say that Alabama's 1941 claim is the most ridiculous in sports. Alabama claims to share the 1941 title because of the Holgate system selecting them as national champions, even though they lost to Mississippi State in their second game of the season. Alabama also claims a national title from 1964, a season where they lost to number 5 Texas in the Orange Bowl. The same thing happened in 1973, where Alabama lost to number 3 Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl to end the season. However, the coaches poll still named Alabama the champion prior to the bowl game. 1978 shared an interesting conundrum as well, as Alabama lost in the regular season to USC, but won the rest of their games, including a Sugar Bowl win over number 1 Penn State. Alabama won the most consensus picks, but USC won the coaches poll, taking the head-to-head matchup into account. Many of these other claimed championships feature an undefeated Alabama, but these 5 years listed are what many college football fans consider the fake titles. Nonetheless, it is all speculation in the eyes of the viewers. Gamecocks stole signals. If you haven't already heard about the Connor Stalions fiasco from earlier, this goes hand in hand with that. As a quick refresher, there was a significant rumor that Michigan was using Stalions for alleged sign stealing and scouting violations in 2022 and 2023. In the case of 2022, many say that this scandal spread to future opponents from Michigan, such as undefeated Ohio State, to potential opponents that they can meet in the postseason. This included supposed attempts to target top-ranked Georgia, as well as Clemson, TCU, and USC, who were also in the 2022 college football playoff race. However, a lot of these conspired thoughts go toward the matchup between number 5 Tennessee, who went on the road to face off against 6-4 South Carolina, who had lost to Florida 38-6 the week before. South Carolina, who was a heavy underdog at home, not only upset the Volunteers, but outright dismantled them, winning 63-38. The conspiracy goes as follows. During the initial Michigan investigation, Sports Illustrated Ross Dellinger reported that Stalions bought a ticket to Tennessee's home game against Kentucky last season. Stalions transferred that ticket to someone who sat in a seat facing the Vols sideline. The assumption is that Stalions bought the ticket so Michigan could decode Tennessee's sideline signals in case the Wolverines played the Vols in the college football playoffs later that season. In an effort to keep the Volunteers from the playoffs, Michigan gave the offensive and defensive signals to South Carolina. This plot got further fire when, after fans rewatched the game, they noticed that South Carolina's defense wore wristbands for the first time all year. If not for what happened the following week, not many people would have even bothered with this idea. But the following week, South Carolina sealed another upset win, beating top 10 Clemson on the road. According to Tiger Illustrated, Stalions bought tickets to a Clemson home game against Syracuse when Clemson was 8-0. As said previously, the sign-stealing scandal is a developing case, so the details of what happened as well as what will happen to Michigan are not confirmed as of now. But did South Carolina cheat to beat Tennessee and Clemson? Again, my job is to simply tell you what the conspiracy at hand was, not to give my own opinion, but as a Tennessee fan, I think that Kentucky's internal feud. At one point in the 2022 offseason, Kentucky's football and basketball coaches got into some drama. This stemmed from an interview with Kentucky's basketball coach, John Calipari, on August 11th saying, quote, "This is a basketball school." This was in response to a push from Calipari for upgraded practice facilities for his Kentucky basketball team. Head coach of the football team, Mark Stoops, responded to the remarks on Twitter and said, "Basketball school? I thought we competed in the SEC." He ended the post with the hashtag 4 straight postseason wins, referring to the Wildcats' recent success. Stoops came to the defense of the football program, citing Calipari's comments as a distraction. He also noted that Kentucky's football program was, quote, "not born on third base." Some fans who noticed this comment thought he might have been alluding to Kentucky's basketball program being so. After these comments, there was nothing else that came from either coach's mouth alluding to the situation, but Kentucky fans kept the speculation going. This, quote, rivalry continued up until Calipari's departure to Arkansas in April of 2024. George P. Burdell. George P. Burdell is a student who enrolled at Georgia Tech in 1927. Since then, he has supposedly received all undergraduate degrees offered by Georgia Tech, served in the military, got married, and served on Mad Magazine's board of directors, among other accomplishments. Among all of these accomplishments is a small factor to note, which is that Burdell is actually a fictional character made as a practical joke by William Edgar Smith. In a 1977 Atlanta newspaper interview, Smith said that he originally intended to enroll his Academy of Richmond County principal, George P. Butler, but instead changed his last name to Burdell, the maiden name of his best friend's mother. After enrolling him, Smith signed Burdell up for all the same classes he had. With the help of his friends, Smith would do all the schoolwork twice, changing it slightly to avoid professors catching on to his sham. On November 27, 2014, George P. Burdell allegedly hacked into the University of Georgia's online master calendar to post a new event titled "Get Ass Kicked by GT," referring to the annual rivalry between Georgia and Georgia Tech. This prank was meant to celebrate the 100-year tradition of clean, old-fashioned hate, the name of the rivalry. While the author of the new calendar was marked as George P. Burdell, undergraduate computer engineering student Ryan Pickren was ultimately arrested and indicted for the crime. The name is a significant staple of the Georgia Tech program. Fun fact, George P. Burdell actually has a LinkedIn account with his listed specialty being "I'm a rambling wreck and a hell of an engineer," an omen to Georgia Tech's fight song. 2011 killed the BCS. College football fans speculate the Bowl Championship Series was later changed to the College Football Playoffs because of the 2011 season and the events that transpired within it. Though many games have this title, the 2011 matchup between number 1 LSU and number 2 Alabama was referred to as the game of the century. This was the first time two SEC football teams came into a regular season matchup undefeated and ranked number 1 and number 2 in the nation. As for the result of the game, LSU connected on a 25-yard field goal to win the game 9-6. After this result, only LSU and the Oklahoma State Cowboys were left as the undefeated teams. However, this all changed when 2 weeks before the end of the regular season, unranked Iowa State beat the Cowboys in double overtime. Once it came time for voting for the BCS National Championship, regardless of Oklahoma State's blowout win over Oklahoma, the polls favored Alabama to play LSU in a rematch. In a turn of events, Alabama knocked off LSU 21-0, resulting in one of the lowest television ratings of any national championship at that point in time. It's more than likely that a playoff system was coming at some point, as there had been significant media push, especially from Utah, who felt they were snubbed all the way back in 2008. However, many feel that the 2011 BCS Championship accelerated this push. Ed Orgeron is a fraud. Edward James Orgeron Jr. is a former defensive lineman and a longtime head coach who is most well known for his time with the LSU Tigers from 2016 up until 2021. This one actually has two different meanings that are pointed to. First off, if you've listened to Ed Orgeron speak at any point in his coaching career, you would instantly recognize his voice at any point in time. However, some college football fans speculate that this voice is actually a fake personality he put on for show in order to fit in with the other Louisiana natives. Notice I said other because Ed Orgeron himself is actually Louisiana native, so other than the significant minority, this is something believed to be false. The other meaning is in reference to his coaching ability. One of the earliest entries on here was about the 2019 LSU team, who broke records offensively and finished with an undefeated 15-0 national championship season. It was expected that the following season, the Tigers would be going through a major reloading season, as co-offensive coordinator Joe Brady, defensive coordinator Dave Aranda, and an abundance of players, including 14 of them who went into the NFL draft, all left the program. After starting the 2020 season with a stunning home loss to Mississippi State, the Tigers were only able to string together 5 more wins. The following year, the Tigers once again lost their home opener at UCLA, finishing out with a losing season at 6-7. During this season, LSU announced their intent to let go Coach Orgeron following the end of the regular season. The speculation from fans is that LSU's legendary 2019 season was formulated from the coordinators and players with little to no help from Orgeron himself. But does this have any legitimacy to it? I'll leave that part up to you. Mark Dantonio's disappearance. The 2016 Michigan State Spartans had their fair share of ups and downs, but one of their more memorable moments came from what looked to be a magic trick. At the end of the game against Wisconsin, down 30-6, on the Big Ten Network telecast, the Spartans coach was caught on camera in the closing moments of the fourth quarter. As a Michigan State player walked in front of the camera, obscuring Dantonio, the coach vanished, as if the crossing player were wiping him out. For a while, people had a laugh about this moment, but if you watch very closely, you can see Dantonio's white shirt moving with the player, but only just barely. Definitely set up an interesting conspiracy for a little while though. Targeting is a power grab for officials. Implemented by the NCAA in 2008, a targeting penalty in football is a severe penalty that occurs when a player intentionally attacks an opponent with forcible contact, such as by lowering their head to make helmet-to-helmet contact. The penalty results in a 15-yard penalty, as well as likely disqualification and potential suspension. This penalty can shift the momentum of a football game in the blink of an eye. Since its inception, the penalties criteria has changed many times. The 2013 modification said that a player who committed targeting in the first half must sit out the rest of the game, and if he committed targeting in the second half, he'd sit out the first half of the following game. 3 years later, in 2016, the targeting rule expanded to include sliding ball carriers as defenseless. By 2019, the NCAA added another long-term penalty. If a player received a third targeting foul within the same season, he would be suspended for the following game. Every single targeting call is subject to being reviewed, so it's of course not like an official can just throw anyone out at any point, but targeting calls themselves have gone under their fair share of controversy, with fans arguing that the penalty in itself is nothing more than a way for officials to control a game to get the result they want. One of the most common conspiracies in college football is that the referees sometimes choose a side in a chosen game. The targeting penalty is what they see as the ultimate way to do it, as it can cause the ejection of a star player. There isn't any legit evidence to reinforce this claim, but there are cases of controversial calls or no calls that could have gone either way. One of these you'll see shortly. Side note, it is possible starting in 2022 for a targeting call in the second half of a previous game to be appealed at a later point, in which the player could later be reinstated. Bishop Sycamore. The Bishop Sycamore Centurions from Columbus, Ohio are behind one of the most obscure scandals of the football world. The high school was advertised as an athletic sports training academy under head coach Leroy Johnson. Being advertised as a high school, many of their student athletes were actually older than high school age, and there was no real campus. Media company Complex conducted an anonymous interview with two former Bishop Sycamore students. They revealed that Johnson recruited the students with the prospect of, quote, practicing at Ohio State's facilities. In reality, they held practice outside of an apartment complex that housed students at Ohio State with no athletic trainers and a significant amount of ethical issues that violated football guidelines. As it later turned out, the school was originally founded as Christians of Faith Academy in 2018, which underwent a different scandal regarding counterfeit currency, credit and debit card fraud, computer fraud, and other potential crimes. None of these details came into light until 2021 when they played high school football powerhouse IMG Academy on August 29th. IMG Academy was dominant throughout the entire game, winning 58-0. As the game went on, play-by-play announcer Anish Sharaf and color commentator Tom Luganbill began to question the legitimacy of Bishop Sycamore. They revealed that ESPN had been unable to verify claims that its roster contained NCAA Division I college prospects, and they could not find any mention of Bishop Sycamore or its players in any recruiting databases. After the game, a Fairfield Inn and Suites where Bishop Sycamore stayed accused the team of attempting to use two invalid checks for $3,596 in order to pay for 25 rooms. The team was also charged $750 for room damages. The Canton Police Department announced that they were investigating the school for forgery. Once the game came to a close, all the details discussed earlier among other fraudulent crimes were brought into the light. Coach Leroy Johnson was fired on August 31st. Johnson was replaced by Tyron Jackson as the school's head football coach. In an interview with Columbus TV station WCMH-TV following his hiring, Jackson acknowledged that the organization was not a school and should not have identified as one. Bishop Sycamore would return as a team and would play a game against Life Christian Academy on November 9, 2023 at Virginia State University, but a day before the game, plans fell through because of a lack of equipment on the end of Life Christian Academy. As for Johnson, he filed for bankruptcy in the summer of 2023. This entire story is one of the most insane scandals in the modern college football era. Jordan McNair. Jordan Martin McNair was a player from Randallstown, Maryland, who played on the offensive line for the Maryland Terrapins. His story is unfortunately a very tragic one. On May 29, 2018, during an off-season workout, McNair collapsed and was hospitalized that evening after visibly showing signs of extreme exhaustion with a body temperature of 106 degrees Fahrenheit. Airlifted into the night, the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center attempted to perform an emergency liver transplant, but tragically, McNair passed before it could be done. Though no cause of death was initially listed for McNair, his parents stated that he died from heat stroke. Immediately following the tragic event, investigators looked into the case and found that trainers failed to recognize the sign of heat illness, nor did they take aggressive measures to cool him despite McNair showing signs of head illness earlier on. On top of this, ESPN found evidence of a toxic culture instilled by the coaching staff led by head coach DJ Durkin and strength and conditioning coach Rick Court. Durkin was suspended one day later and then fired on October 31st, 2018 by the university president. Court was also fired earlier on. McNair's family started the Jordan McNair Foundation on July of 2018. On May 31st, 2019, the Jordan McNair Foundation held its first annual Jordan McNair Golf Classic tournament at Turf Valley Resort in Howard County, Maryland. Events included an auction to raise funds for the foundation, whose mission is to raise awareness of heat-related illnesses. The Earthquake Game. In 1988, the 2-2 LSU Tigers hosted the undefeated 4-0 Auburn Tigers. Along with national rankings, the game also proved to be of great significance of that season's eventual SEC title. The game was dominated by defense. LSU only managed one drive of over 10 yards in the first half. Auburn led 6-0 with less than 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, as LSU's quarterback Tommy Hodson drove the team down the field before throwing an 11-yard touchdown pass to Eddie Fuller on fourth down. The reaction of the crowd after the final pass caused ground motion registered by a seismograph located in LSU's Hal Russell Geoscience Complex around 1,000 feet from the stadium. There are other games which receive similar levels of seismic activity, such as several games in Virginia Tech's Lane Stadium, and another case is the entry in which is now making its fourth appearance, the Kick 6. This also happened twice in LSU Stadium in 2022 when LSU beat Alabama in overtime. Georgia intentionally injured Marvin Harrison Jr. Remember when we talked about targeting being a power grab for officials? This is such an example such fans refer to. This is in reference to the 2022 Peach Bowl college football playoff semifinal between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State going into the second half had a 28-24 lead over the Bulldogs. With less than a minute left in the third quarter and up 35-24, Ohio State quarterback CJ Stroud threw an attempted pass to Marvin Harrison Jr. But while attempting to catch the ball, he took a massive hit from Georgia defensive back Javon Bullard in the end zone. This hit left Harrison completely unconscious and unable to play for the remainder of the game. The hit left Ohio State players and coaches wanting a targeting call, but that never happened. Harrison underwent concussion protocol as the game continued. Georgia would climb their way back into the game, taking the lead late and beating Ohio State 42-41. Obviously unhappy with the call, Ohio State head coach Ryan Day went on to say that he made multiple phone calls, including to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 conferences, the latter of which provided the officials for the game. When talking about what head of the officials Steve Shaw said, Day said, quote, "He explained to me that the hit didn't go right to Marvin's head, that it wasn't a shot to his head, it was to the shoulder. I completely disagree with that, but that is the discussion that was made." This made Ohio State fans irate, demanding that the officials be investigated, while also pointing to the conspiracy that Bullard did this intentionally in order to take out Ohio State's strongest offensive weapon. Some fans even said that the officials knew that that should have been a targeting penalty, but favored the SEC in the call for revenue reasons. This is all speculation though, as there isn't any way to prove that this was intentional. Donald D. LaHaye Jr. Donald D. LaHaye Jr. is a former college football kicker who played for UCF from 2015 through 2016. He is also a YouTuber by the name of Deestroying with 2 E's. In 2017, D. LaHaye drew attention when the NCAA told him to delete or demonetize his YouTube channel in order to stay on the football team, as the NCAA at that time forbid its athletes from profiting off their academic ability aside from scholarships. Faced with this dilemma, D. LaHaye ultimately chose to continue his channel normally at the cost of his scholarship and NCAA eligibility. D. LaHaye sued UCF over this matter in July of 2018, settling in November of 2018 to finish his education there. Since then, he has made amends with UCF, attending multiple games with on-field passes and posting footage of himself at games. Additionally, current UCF head coach Gus Malzahn and his coaching staff have invited him to multiple football-related events. Deestroying currently has nearly 6 million subscribers on YouTube. Baker Mayfield arrest video. Baker Reagan Mayfield is a former quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners between 2014 through 2017. He won the Heisman Trophy in 2017, as well as many other accolades. In early 2017, Mayfield was arrested and charged with public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest in Fayetteville, Arkansas. A preliminary police report says an intoxicated Mayfield first told an officer he was trying to break up an altercation, but Mayfield later was yelling profanities and causing a scene while the officer questioned another man. On March 10th, a video was released showing the altercation between Mayfield and the officers, showing him attempting to run away from the officers and being unsuccessful. Mayfield was forced to pay $300 in fines, $100 for each charge, along with $160 for court costs, and $483.20 in restitution. Iowa gambling scandal. The state of Iowa was under some major heat following allegations of players from both Iowa and Iowa State taking part in sports gambling. Before the 2023 season, Iowa State starting quarterback Hunter Dekkers was accused of gambling on Cyclone sports events, including a 2021 football game, and was charged with 4 other Iowa or Iowa State players. Dekkers was expected to be the starting quarterback for Iowa State in 2023, but after the news broke out, he stepped away from the team. The 5 were among more than a dozen athletes from the 2 schools who faced criminal charges in connection to a state investigation into illegal sports wagering. All originally were charged with tampering with records, an aggravated misdemeanor punishable for up to 2 years in prison. It was later proven that Dekkers is one of the individuals who bet on his own team when he was not even playing in the game. Along with this, Dekkers is alleged to have placed approximately 366 bets, totaling over $2,799, with 25 of those bets involving other Iowa State events. Dekkers, along with all the other student athletes involved, were forced to pay a $645 fine, and all additional charges were dropped. Dekkers has since enrolled at Iowa Western Community College, the defending junior college national champions. He is eligible for the 2024 season, according to the Rivers Media Relations Department. 1998 EMPs. This is the main conspiracy from the 1998 college football season, which was the first year of the BCS. Firstly, EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse, or a brief burst of electromagnetic energy. It is important to know this for the sake of the entry here. Through November, Tennessee, Kansas State, and UCLA were fighting for the top spot in the BCS poll. Tennessee and UCLA were highly prestigious programs in college football, but Kansas State was an up-and-coming program with little to no history behind them, and more importantly, less revenue. On November 14th, number 1 Tennessee was in massive trouble, down against number 10 Arkansas 24-20 with minimal time left. The game was virtually over until Arkansas quarterback Clint Stoerner fumbled the ball, being recovered by Tennessee's Billy Ratliff. The Volunteers later scored the game-winning touchdown, staying on top of the polls. Going into conference championship week, the national poll contained number 1 Tennessee, along with number 2 UCLA and number 3 Kansas State as the lone undefeated teams. Kansas State needed a loss from either UCLA against Miami or Tennessee against Mississippi State in order to enter the number 2 spot for a chance at the national championship. They got their wish as UCLA lost to Miami. All Kansas State had to do from this point on was win their game against Texas A&M in order to make the national championship, and it looked like such was the case, being up 27-19. In the fourth quarter, however, Kansas State quarterback Michael Bishop fumbled the ball deep into their own field, giving A&M a chance to tie the game, which they did, and later on A&M would win the game in overtime. As a result of both of these fumbles, Tennessee would play Florida State for the BCS National Championship. These 2 fumbles are very important to note, as right before both fumbles, there is a bright light shown on both quarterbacks right before the ball falls out of their hands. There is also a light seen from the sidelines of the regular season matchup for Tennessee, and in the Big 12 Championship, the same light is seen from out of the end zone. Many consider this to be nothing more than a coincidence, but some believe that these lights are the result of EMPs used to artificially change the game and the landscape of the season, resulting in a result that the powers that would be want. A significant majority of these details came from a YouTube video which noted the conspiracy in whole. However, the video has long since been removed from the platform. The video is up on Dailymotion for anyone curious, however. Even if none of this is true, this conspiracy set up the BCS for a long list of controversies in its lifetime. Sheesh. Well, that was another list of entries over and done with. Hard to believe we're already past part 5 and almost done with this iceberg. I've got 2 more parts of this before I'll be done with this series, so leave your recommendations down in the comment section. As always, I appreciate all of you guys for watching, and make sure if you haven't already, like the video and subscribe to Squidtard Sports. As always, I'll see you guys in the next part.